So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, Karina Altman had promised to give us a real definition of kinds. I don't think she'll actually do that, but oh well. Time to grab your snack and beverage, and let's finally see what a kind is.
The inability to hybridize does not mean two animals do not belong to the same created kind. For instance, alpacas and camels are part of the same created kind, but the size difference prevents them from breeding, right? Alpacas are really little, camels are really big.
Nope. Not gonna let you give your hybrid examples, because I already know that you think being able to breed means it's the same kind, but that not being able to breed doesn't mean it's a different kind. So let's skip by this, because the important part is being able to tell what's not in a kind, not what is. Also, I cut out 6 minutes of uselessly listing off hybrid animals like growler bears and mules. You're welcome.
But they're still part of the same kind.
How do you know?
Now, scientists will also group animals together based on their physical characteristics and their DNA. There's something called cognitum, which basically means if you look at it, you kind of know they're related. For instance, if you saw 2 squirrels, 2 rabbits, and 2 rats next to each other, you would know which ones kind of belong with which, right?
Yes, the rats and the squirrels belong together, and the rabbits are the odd ones out. But if you tossed in a baboon, then the baboon would be the odd one out. And if you then added a shrew, the shrew would be the odd one out. So where is the kind? And don't tell me intuition, because that's subjective, and human intuition is really bad at figuring things out in science.
You can intuitively tell that, but they'll also use their DNA sequencing to figure out which animals belong to what kind.
Great. Intuition. Well, that's nonsense. Funny thing is, though, that when you use DNA, you recover the most likely explanation as universal common descent. So the only kind there is in the world is life kind, and humans share a common ancestor with bacteria.
All right. So now we're going to talk about how did all these animals fit on Noah's Ark?
So you're going to go with a kind is whatever I think it is. Just shut up about it. Really? I'm not surprised that that's your definition, if it can be called that, but I'm a little surprised you even bothered to say you were going to define a kind when you weren't ever planning to do so.
Genesis 6:19-20 says only representatives of air-breathing, land, animal, and bird kinds were present on the ark, not all species.
Then why do we have all the other animals that wouldn't have survived a flood? You know, basically all of them? They should all be extinct.
So remember, today there's about 2 million species in the world today, but most of those are invertebrates, which are animals without backbones, or marine life, which would not have to be on the ark, right?
This just in, invertebrates can survive any and all floods and don't have to worry about water salinity changes, what they're going to eat for a year, delicate ecosystems that would be destroyed, like coral reefs, etc. Same for fish, too. Oh wait, that's stupid, and you're an idiot.
So that eliminates most of your species right there. Now, what about insects? Do those count?
Well, they're air-breathing animals, so they should count.
This is a jeweled flower mantis from India. I think it's one of the most beautiful insects out there. So insects likely don't qualify because they do not breathe air through nostrils, and they could easily survive a worldwide flood as eggs, larvae, or pupae.
Yeah, spiracles make you immune to drowning. And you know, insect eggs and pupae aren't exactly waterproof. Nor do insects typically spend a year or so in any of those life stages. But even for the ones that do, like cicadas, who can spend more than a decade as a grub depending on species, those ones tend to burrow underground and feed on roots. What are they going to do underwater for a year with all the adult plants drowned because, spoilers, plants can drown? Of course, it's not easy to see what you do with a pair of cicada grubs on the ark either, so I guess it's just a bad time for the cicadas. In fact, I think the cicada just about debunks the story altogether. I knew they had to be good for something besides annoying the crap out of me.
But if they did board the ark, they wouldn't take up much room, right? They'd take up like this much space.
I mean, that depends on how many kinds there are, doesn't it? And since you've given us no way to know how many insect kinds there are, there's no way to even calculate how much space they might take up.
So there are some excellent articles on answersingenesis.org that address this very specific question. So if you want more information on this topic, I encourage you to look that up on answersingenesis.org.
Maybe. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in me looking that all up. Because if you are, I may look into it. If not, I'm not going to do it.
So once we eliminate all once we eliminate all marine and invertebrate species and get into the kinds mindset, that means the Ark only needed to house the ancestors of today's less than 34,000 land-dependent vertebrate species. Again, a vertebrate is an animal with a backbone.
Too bad that makes the scenario less plausible rather than more plausible. But hey, it's not like the land-based vertebrates would have fared all that much better than all the extinct animals, since as you well know, being the zookeeper at the Ark, even with modern climate control and powered ventilation, is fundamentally unsuited to housing animals for any length of time, never mind being filled to the brim with them.
So that amounts to only about 1,400 animal kinds.
It's always nice when you just make up a number and then don't bother to tell anyone how you came up with it, or give them a way to check your numbers. You know, in science, you have to give your methods, and if people can't use your methods to get similar results, it means you're basically a fraud. You didn't even attempt to get to that point. So you're basically frauds right from the word go.
And this was a number that was determined by a research group within Answers in Genesis here, using a biblical model for kinds.
Oh, a biblical model you didn't bother to share or publish. Again, that's what is considered fraud in the scientific community.
So, how could they have fit? This again adds up to about 6,800 individual animals. Now, 85% of those animals would have been 22 pounds or less.
I don't know how you know that. Apparently, a kind can vary from the size of a rusty spotted cat at 14 inches long and weighing less than a pound, to a tiger 11 feet long and weighing in at 700 pounds or so. So, how big was the ancestral felid? I don't know, and neither do you. At least not just on the basis of identifying these kinds.
That's not a lot of room at all, right?
As a zookeeper, you should know better. Even if you're correct, most mammals at least need considerable space for exercise, enrichment, etc., and will fare horribly if kept in some stall barely big enough to physically fit them. Just as a mild example, have you ever heard of stable vices? They're habits, some of which can become pathological, that develop in horses that spend too much time in their stables. Some of these vices can cause serious diseases such as colic in horses. Now imagine a whole slew of animals with such problems. Some animals in confined spaces will rub against the walls so much that they rub their skin off in patches. And you have to remember, this flood is supposed to have lasted a bit over a year.
And they would likely have been juvenile animals because they were responsible for repopulating their entire species. They also eat less, they produce less waste, they take up less space. So instead of taking a giant 15, 20-foot saltwater crocodile, you just needed to take the ancestor of the crocodilian kind as a little baby, right?
Oh, the problem there is that many animals can't survive without direct care from parents and demand much more frequent feedings and much more attention than adults. Plus, many animals raised away from the adults of their species develop serious behavioral problems. So that's not really an option either.
Because they are responsible for repopulating their entire species, so you don't want to take large, older animals, right? You want to take young animals who have a long reproductive life ahead of them.
What about animals who could die of old age on the Ark, even if you took them on board as babies? Mice have trouble making it past their first birthday, and according to most interpretations, Noah was on the Ark with all the animals for a year, give or take 10 days. There is even a rat species that has trouble making it past 6 months, and a chameleon species that typically can't get to a year old. Was a short lifespan just something that evolved within your undefined kinds? I don't know, but we certainly have reason to believe that there are animals that couldn't be taken on board as babies to be released after the flood, because they'd be dead by then.
And again, we're talking about the kinds representative, not each species. So you didn't need to take a pair of alligators, crocodiles, and caimans. You just needed to take this pair of the original crocodilian kind as a baby.
I wonder if she knows that according to the standard scientific model, alligators and crocodiles have a divergence time of 80 million years. A similar divergence time of 84 million years separates humans from giraffes. So, at a first level of approximation, an alligator is about as related to a crocodile as a human is to a giraffe. These kinds seem to be really nebulous, don't they?
So again, that adds up to 6,800 individual animals, 85% of which weighed less than 22 pounds, and they were babies. All right, so how big was the ark actually? So let's look at the Bible. In Genesis 6:14 through 16, it says the ark had 3 decks, and it was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits tall. Well, what is a cubit? It is the distance from a person's elbow to the tip of their longest finger. Now, that is different for every person, so what we used was the royal cubit, which was used in a lot of ancient construction projects, and that amounted to between 20.4 to 21.6 inches. So when Answers in Genesis wanted to build the ark, they used the worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario, the smallest possible ark, would be using a cubit that is 20.4 inches long.
Maybe using the royal cubit, but your worst case scenario would assume the smallest cubit of an adult human, which would be considerably shorter. That being said, I don't really think the size of the ark facade of the building you built is out of line with what the story is trying to convey.
And that still gives you this. So this is the Ark Encounter. This is built to biblical scale. You guys can visit this in Williamstown, Kentucky, about 45 minutes away. I highly encourage it. So the biblical ark, worst case scenario, was still 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet tall, and had a 1.88 million cubic feet.
Okay, let's assume, to be generous, that all the decks on the ark are the same size. This means that we have 11,854 square meters, or a bit under 3 acres, to work with across all 3 decks. Let's compare this to the San Diego Zoo, which houses 3,700 animals, far fewer than the 6,800 that AIG claims on the basis of no evidence at all, is what was needed on the ark. The San Diego Zoo is 100 acres. This means that on average, each animal at the zoo has a bit more than 109 square meters. Each animal in the ark has just over 1 3/4 square meters. It's not easy to run the zoo for a year. In fact, it costs $230 million a year to run a zoo, with only about half as many animals as the ark, and they need almost 12 times more area per animal than the ark. And still, people complain about the poor quality of life of animals even in modern zoos, like the San Diego Zoo. And the thing is, our speaker here knows this. She's a zookeeper. She knows she couldn't keep animals in the ark with a staff of 8 for a year, especially if they were all babies, who need more, not less attention than adults.
That is a huge ship. Now, to put that into more perspective, here's the ark against some comparisons. So it's about 1.5 football fields long, 2 school buses wide, and 3 giraffes high. And it has the volume of 483 semi-trailers.
I like how she goes on about volume, when except for the very smallest of animals, you can't just stack animals on top of each other. The place where you have the crocodiles, you're not going to be able to put some deer on top of that. That's going to be it in terms of animal storage for that area on that deck. For the most part, all that having tall decks will do is make it so the tall animals can physically fit.
That is more than enough room for 6,800 baby animals, 85% of which weighed less than 22 pounds. So, plenty of room is still left for storage, as well as living space for Noah's family. So, this is what the ark looked like. It was not this tiny little fairy tale ship with animals crammed in it. This is a very different concept. So, again, when we go back to the Bible and read what the Bible says, it all makes much more sense.
But that's the thing, it doesn't. Your giant ark still has no ventilation, not enough room, far too many animals for the available staff, and it is supposed to have existed this way for a year. And that's forgetting about the fact that some of the animals need highly special diets. Take koalas. They only eat eucalyptus leaves, and only from branches, and only fresh. Even if you had a eucalyptus tree and took the leaves off of it to feed them, they wouldn't eat them, because koalas are so monumentally stupid that they won't recognize the leaves as food unless they're on a tree. So what? Did Noah need a eucalyptus tree in the koala enclosure? And you can't take baby koalas, because in order to get the bacteria into their guts to digest the tough eucalyptus leaves, they have to eat their mother's fecal matter for months. So the ark apparently had a garden with full-grown koalas eating from a eucalyptus tree on a boat where everything is dying of carbon dioxide and methane poisoning, while 8 people try to clean up the droppings of 6,800 animals.
So, in conclusion, God created all the animal kinds 6,000 years ago.
Even if he did, that doesn't matter, because any pre-flood diversity was wiped out.
Each kind started with animals that had vast genetic potential,
nearly all of which would have been wiped out during the flood if we take the story seriously.
Noah had less than 6,800 juvenile animals on the ark, representing 1,400 kinds.
Except that he couldn't, because in most cases, infant animals are harder, not easier to take care of, and that number is based on literally nothing. You just made it up to make the story seem less absurd, but it's still completely absurd, so it didn't help.
As each of their descendant generations became isolated after the flood, they formed many new species,
which would require new genetic diversity to come about spontaneously, which is the whole thing you say can't happen, and it would need to come about at such a rate that the animals in question would simply die from an overload of mutations.
Natural selection, mutations, and selective breeding are all reasons for the diversity we see today. So the features of different individual populations of animals became more distinct and specialized as they adapted to their environments in a post-flood world, which were very different depending on where you are. For instance, here's the bear kind. So today we have 8 species of bears.
Yup, even the relatively small group of Ursidae is far too diverse to have come off of the Ark. Maybe if the only bears were brown and black bears, this might be feasible. But not really, because still, those 2 species internally have far too much genetic diversity to have arisen from just 2 bears getting off the Ark.
Very, very different bears spread all over the globe, but they're all still bears, right? They cannot breed with horses, they cannot breed with dogs, they cannot breed with cats. They are not turning into anything different. They are still bears.
Except that, according to you, not being able to breed doesn't mean that animals are in different kinds. So you haven't pointed out why horses, bears, and dogs can't be in the same kind. And since they're all furungulates, I'd say maybe they should be in the same kind. As for becoming something different, even if your idea were true, they did become different things. Can you tell the difference between a black bear, a polar bear, and a panda? Yes? Well then, their common ancestor became different things, didn't it? That's what evolution is. It's not birds turning into bears. It's bears diversifying into new kinds of bear. And over time, and assuming no widespread bear extinction, bears could evolve to look quite different from each other and from their common ancestor.
So again, this is important to be able to answer these questions.
I agree. It is important for creationists to answer these questions. Too bad this speech did nothing to help them do that. And that's it. She then just reads some Bible passages to say how important all of this is, and then gives an extended commercial for AIG material. Since I don't care about either, I'm not going to subject you to it. If you want that AIG material, I have full confidence that you can find it on your own. I have smart viewers. If you liked this video, please remember to hit like, and if you didn't, hit dislike and tell me why you didn't like it in the comments. If you're not subscribed, please do so, and if you haven't already, hit the bell icon so you're always notified when there's more Dapper Dino content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching. But before you go, I'd like to take some time to thank my patrons, especially my $20 and above patrons. Ian Chen, Chris Love, Henry Hutanen, Bob Knob, The Evil Scotsman, and Bent Hovind. As you know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and my patrons give me much needed stability. If you'd like to join the team, there's a link in the description to my Patreon, which starts at $1. If you'd like, I also have a link to my Teespring store and an Amazon wishlist.
So you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.